A federal judge dismisses the criminal charges against James Comey and Letitia James, saying President Trump did not properly appoint the prosecutor who indicted them, who was acting without any legal authority. Is this maybe a way out of the lawfare spiral, or will the Justice Department's vow to appeal keep the country spinning down it?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial page, columnists Bill McGurn and Barton Swaim. President Trump's lawfare revenge tour has gone bust, at least for now. Federal prosecutors were initially skeptical on the merits of both of these cases against former FBI Director James Comey for allegedly lying to Congress and against New York Attorney General Letitia James for alleged mortgage fraud. But after the U.S. attorney in Eastern Virginia resigned under pressure earlier this year, and with the statute of limitations on the Comey allegations looming, the Trump administration moved swiftly to name Lindsey Halligan as the interim U.S. attorney. But on Monday, Judge Cameron McGowan Curry dismissed both of these cases, saying that Halligan's installation did not comply with the federal vacancy law, so these indictments were never valid in the first place. Here's James Comey responding in a statement on Instagram.
I'm grateful that the court ended the case against me, which was a prosecution based on malevolence and incompetence, and a reflection of what the Department of Justice has become under Donald Trump, which is heartbreaking. But I was also inspired by the example of the career people who refused to be part of this travesty. It cost some of them their jobs, which is painful, but it preserved their integrity, which is beyond price. And I know they will serve again. I was very lucky that some of the best lawyers in America stepped forward to represent me. I hope they serve as an example to more and more lawyers, especially at some of the big firms, to participate in protecting our liberty, protecting the rule of law.
Bill, what's your reaction here? I guess mine is that this is what happens when the executive branch cuts corners, is the judiciary rules against it and prosecutors end up losing cases.
Yeah, I think they're two separate issues. One is the substance of the allegations against Jim Comey and Letitia James. And I think there's some merit to the substance. But as you say, the problem was they did this on deadline. Whenever you try to go around the rules, you end up creating problems. Something as serious as indicting a former FBI director and a state attorney general, that's serious, and you get caught. So I think it's a setback. I don't think the case is over because, one, I believe that Donald Trump is intent on doing whatever he can. And two, there are ways for them to continue the prosecution, notwithstanding other procedural problems that they'll have.
The White House is vowing to respond here. Let's listen to Attorney General Pam Bondi at a press conference on Monday, reacting to that statement by James Comey.
We'll be taking all available legal action, including an immediate appeal, to hold Letitia James and James Comey accountable for their unlawful conduct.
What is your reaction to his statement?
I'm going to keep going on this. I'm not worried about someone who has been charged with a very serious crime. His alleged actions were a betrayal of public trust.
And here is President Trump this week on Air Force One.
They got out on a technicality, and you'll see what happens from here on. But if you look at the actual charges, I think anybody that looks at it very fairly would say, boy, are they guilty. So let's see what happens over the next week. You know, the court didn't say you couldn't bring the case, re-bring the case, or appeal the case. So they have a lot of options. They're going to call the shot. I'm not calling the shot. But Lindsey's a very talented lawyer, actually.
Barton, I guess I would dissent from the idea that this is a technicality. It seems pretty foundational to me, which is, are the presidential appointees doing their job lawfully? And what's really at issue here is this federal vacancy law So Congress passed a law. The Senate obviously has the power to review and confirm or not confirm the president's appointees to these top level jobs, including these federal prosecutor posts to U.S. attorney. But Congress, I think, recognizing that there can be periods of transition when a new president comes into office, or periods of transition simply when a prosecutor leaves for family reasons or any reason, offered the president a little bit of leeway. So there's a statute that says the attorney general, when there is a U.S. attorney vacancy, may appoint someone to that post for 120 days. And then after that point, it goes to the district court of the district court in question. The judges are allowed to fill the post. And often what happens is the president names someone and the 120 days expires. And then the court says, we will retain that person. We'll just let that person continue in their duties. And part of what I think is interesting about what the judge's ruling here is, Barton, is she basically says that if the Trump administration's position wins and the president can do serial 120-day appointments to these kinds of jobs, it's a way to circumvent Senate confirmation. The president would never need to go to the Senate and say, here is my nominee for the U.S. attorney post in the Eastern District of Virginia, if you can just re-up somebody every 120 days.
Right. I guess the balance of power question here is a little tricky. There's some precedent, I gather. Congress has written laws giving appointment powers to executive agency heads, but I'm not sure that it can give the judicial branch power to appoint members of the executive branch. That seems a little tricky to me. I mean, it sounds like a classic case, in my view, of a well-intended law meant to keep the DOJ staffed, failing to anticipate power struggles between the other two branches. On the 120 days law provision, I do have one question. If it were so obvious that Trump couldn't appoint a new interim U.S. attorney, why didn't the district judges step in and say, hold on, this is our purview, and we're appointing this other prosecutor as interim? Maybe there was some discussion that I'm not aware of, but it should have been controversial before we got two indictments and into a hearing. But I do think the administration will refile. They should get a 6-month extension of the statute of limitations after the dismissal. I know there's some argument that the indictment never existed, that it's null and void, it never happened, so there's no 6-month extension. But as I understand it, there's precedent for extending even after dismissals like this one. And I think the Attorney General is probably right that she'll be back on this.
It's a reasonable question why the district court did not act. I guess a couple of potential answers. One is that maybe the judges are mindful of this separation of powers question, and particularly given the swiftness with which the Trump administration moved to install Halligan and to replace this outgoing U.S. attorney. If you require a vote of all of the judges of the district court in order to extend or make this kind of hire, if that's how the law has operated and been interpreted in the past, that takes a little bit of organization, and the executive has a bit more speed with which it can make those kinds of decisions. But it is a reasonable point about the separation of powers, I think, Bill, the constitutionality of this kind of setup. Maybe Congress can say, we are going to give the president the power for 120 days to fill this kind of vacancy without Senate review, and then the Senate check comes back into place, because I think the Senate should be jealous of its power and its check on presidential appointees. But can Congress take that second step and say, after 120 days, we are going to let the district court, the judicial branch, fill this kind of prosecutor's post? I would agree with Barton. That looks somewhat constitutionally dubious to me. On the other hand, I'm not sure this has been extensively litigated. And if it gets litigated, one thing the appeals courts might do is strike down the whole setup. It's not necessarily the case that the appeals courts, the U.S. Supreme Court, would say this second piece, this giving the power to the court to appoint a prosecutor, is not okay, and that means the president gets totally free reign. The Supreme Court or the appeals courts might say, actually, this whole scheme is a violation of the separation of powers, and the whole thing has to go.
Yeah, it reminds me of, picking up a rock in your backyard and there's all sorts of nasty things underneath that you didn't anticipate. We're going to doubtless get a clarification of what the constitutional limits mean, like in practice. I'm not persuaded yet it's going to be better clarification. It could be rulings that are not better, that leave it murkier in some ways. All of this gets us farther and farther away from the original point. I mean, the sad thing is the interest seems to have been lost in the substance of the charges. I think James Comey and Letitia James behave very badly. And Trump behaves badly sometimes, but I mean, you look at James Comey, everything is done in the dark. I think if you look at his statement to Congress and, look what he's accused of, it's hard to argue that was truthful. I don't know that it was criminal, that it amounts to perjury, but it was not truthful, and it was sneaky. The way he does things is sneaky. Trump's big problem is he shoots off his mouth and says everything in public usually. But his opponents a lot of times are so sneaky. And I think Letitia James is in even more trouble because there's a mountain of evidence against her.
Barton, one last thought on this appointments issue. The same legal question has been playing out in other judicial districts around the country, including New Jersey, where Trump did the same kind of interim appointment for one of his allies, Alina Habba. There's been a judicial ruling in that area that she has not been properly appointed, and that is now being appealed. But it is a constant tension, I think, these days when we have these polarized politics, including in the Senate, and a president who wants to get his priorities through, including these kinds of nominees that are needed to enact his agenda. And, if it's the Justice Department, for example, to get his prosecutorial priorities in place, it's a tension of the executive being frustrated at how slow this confirmation process sometimes is. And we've seen that in the past, several months after President Trump took office. He periodically calls for the Senate to go out of session to allow him recess appointments, which would have let him basically up and down the org chart of the federal government, the executive branch, fill posts without any kind of Senate confirmation. But to my eye, this is a paradigmatic example of why the founders created that Senate check. I mean, remember what happened here. We have a set of prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office that have looked at these charges and declined to bring them. Some reporting that they had a memo laying out their issues with these cases. New U.S. attorney then that is installed without any kind of Senate check. And poof, suddenly there are indictments that materialize. I mean, that is why the Senate needs to stand up, I think, for its prerogatives and say, we get the right to review these nominees and these appointees. I'm not sure whether Alina Habba or Lindsey Halligan would be able to get those 50 votes from a Senate that is controlled by the Republicans. I mean, it would be 50 votes plus a vice presidential tiebreaker. I'm not sure whether they would be able to garner that support or not, but at least there's some kind of a process.
In my view, the Senate Democrats really poisoned the well during Trump's first term. I remember well covering the way in which all down the line through agency after agency, many appointees were simply denied hearings, forever postponed by the opposition. And it really hobbled a lot of the agencies. The education department, I remember, went forever without some top level appointees. And just to look at it from a sort of philosophical point of view, if liberals want a massive federal government run by experts and executive agencies doing all manner of things, well, then they're going to have to put people in charge, even when their party is not at the top of the executive branch. But yes, these particular appointments that you're describing, it did look like Trump is cutting corners, and you have to expect that he'll have some consequences for that.
Bill, what do you make of this as another spin in the lawfare spiral, which I think is one of the concerns that we go down this road as a country? I do expect that the Justice Department is going to appeal this, or maybe they will have another prosecutor, find another prosecutor to bring these indictments against Letitia James and James Comey. But are we starting to get into a tit for tat where one party brings lawfare cases against the other party when it's in power, and after 2 or 4 years, the voters get fed up, maybe related to some of that lawfare, but also maybe related to other things, the economy, the border, what have you, and the parties switch which of them is in power, and then the party that was out of power now uses its newfound power to take retribution against the party that was previously doing the lawfare. And if you get in this back and forth, I worry when it stops. And maybe one way it could stop is if these kinds of rulings against Lindsey Halligan or some of the future defenses that Letitia James and James Comey might be able to raise, maybe selective prosecution, maybe on the merits of these cases. I know Letitia James's side has been arguing that this information that has been put out does not clear any sort of bar for mortgage fraud. And if the Trump administration goes after its political enemies in this way and misses, maybe that's a way to break the cycle.
I'd like to think so, but I doubt it. I mean, one of the issues of lawfare is you don't have to necessarily get a conviction to succeed. If I sue you, I can cost you lots of money just defending yourself and just the hassle of it. I mean, a lot of it is for the hassle. So I don't think so. I expect the Democrats to come back very strong and just continue where they left off against Trump, as they've tried to do. So it's a real dilemma because no one wants to stop first. And one of the hard things is if someone does something bad, the lawfare brings that case against you, and then there are no consequences for it. They're just free to do it again. And frankly, that's what we have with the Democratic Party. Trump commits his sins. Mostly they're retaliatory. They were out to impeach him before he was even elected the first time. And there were riots and so forth. So I think we're in a grim spiral now, and I don't see an easy way out. And by the same token, I think if Trump succeeded and put these people in jail, I don't think that would end it either. That would only make the Democrats want to get their own revenge when they get back in. So it's kind of very bad for the Republic, the way the incentives are all escalatory. None of them are to go quietly and just say, this isn't worth it.
I have some thoughts on that too. I think it's fair to say that we on the editorial page regret all of these sorts of punitive indictments against the president's enemies. I have to say some more than others. It's pretty hard for me to feel sorry for Letitia James when she went after Trump for precisely the sort of low-level peccadillo that the DOJ is indicting her for. On the other hand, the attempt to go after like Lisa Cook, you mentioned, the Fed governor, or our friend John Bolton, those seem, at least to me, completely unjustified. But if we as a country are going to learn anything from this episode, if we're ever going to break this cycle, our news media are going to have to come to terms with the fact that, as Bill mentioned, these things are retaliatory. They didn't come from nowhere. That the lawfare didn't start with Trump. Yes, he's going after Comey. I think you could fairly say for payback. That's the way it looks to me. But Comey did, in fact, try to destroy him. And particularly in a devious, unethical way. That's true. Okay. Letitia James would have jailed Trump on ridiculous charges if she could have. That's also true. And yet media reports consistently fail to make this obvious point. Our media prides itself on putting everything in context and interpreting the big picture and so on. Well, in this case, they completely ignore the big picture. And as a result, I think we're going to fail to learn the lesson every time this subject comes up in the press. I read this morning 2 or 3 times. You see the phrase Trump's perceived enemies. Well, okay, some of these targets are perceived. I think John Bolton is not actually an enemy, but Comey was an actual enemy. James was also one, in my view. She all but said so. Trump isn't delusional about them. So I assume that when the next Democratic administration takes, punitive measures against former Trump administration officials, the media will interpret the whole thing as completely above board and ethical and ordinary, and we'll I guess never break the cycle. I don't know.
Well, one more piece of fodder I would throw in here is the pardon power, because I think we're already starting to see that as another response. And Barton, I'm not sure if that's a way to break the cycle or not, but remember when President Biden left office, an hour before the inauguration of President Trump or so, he pardoned a bunch of people. And now we're seeing some pardons from President Trump, one earlier this month, a bunch of allies of his in 2020, broad pardon for conduct during the 2020 election. Maybe that's a response, but it kind of a worrying one too, given the real unreviewable and broad nature of the pardon power that the Constitution gives the president. I worry about that as a reaction as well, because if the expectation then becomes at the end of every administration, every change of power, there's going to be some broad pardon for everybody up and down the executive branch issued by the president. That's not a great incentive either.
Yeah, I'm skeptical that we can break this cycle by sort of procedural means or affecting policy. Somebody's going to have to show some character and leadership on this matter, and also just exercise some discretion and realize that we're not going to take punitive measures here. A lot of this latest stuff goes back to the decision on the part of, I think, Merrick Garland's DOJ to raid Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago. That didn't have to be done. He wouldn't be president now if that had not been done. That was dumb. So just show some wisdom, show some leadership and some character, and I think that's likelier to get us out of this spiral than anything sort of law that we could pass.
Thank you, Barton and Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back later this week with another edition of Potomac Watch.